Okay, now you can hear me better.
Yeah, now you're really on.
Now you can hear me.
Where do Mike Robinson and Leah live?
They live, you know where the Publix is on Garden?
Yeah?
They're about a block, 2 blocks from that, just off Garden. West of it, in a little subdivision. What? Right. Well, let's get started. Last week, those that weren't here, I'll go through a little bit of a brief explanation. Well, we went through Daniel 7 and 8, and we're talking about kingdoms. Daniel 7 talked about 4 beasts. What did the four beasts represent? 4 empires. 4 empires, 4 kingdoms. And that was in chapter 7. They were kind of weird looking beasts. And then it talked about the Ancient of Days coming. And the Ancient of Days would have an everlasting kingdom. That was in chapter 7. Chapter 8 really only focused on 2 kingdoms. Do you remember what the 2 kingdoms were? It was the goat and the ram. The goat was first. The goat had 2 horns. One horn was bigger than the other one. And then the ram had one big honking horn that after it went through the world, that horn broke off and 4 horns came up. And we talked about that one in chapter 8. What were those 2, what did those 2 animals represent? What kingdoms? It was the 2 horns. One horn was bigger than the other one. The Medo-Persians, that was the Medes and the Persians. Darius was a Mede. Cyrus the Great was a Persian. The greater horn was Cyrus. The lesser horn was Darius. So you had those 2 particular ones. So that represented the Persian kingdom because it got shortened. It really became the Persian kingdom as opposed to the Persian Medes. The Medes kind of faded away. Then you had the big ram that had a big horn. And then after he had gone over the earth, the horn was broken and 4 horns. What did the ram represent? It was the Greeks, the Grecian Empire. And the big horn was Alexander the Great. And what did he do after he conquered the world? He died. He was like in his 30s. And his 4 generals took over the kingdom. And split it up into 4 pieces. And one of them, Seleucus, took over most of the kingdom. And so that's what it talks about in chapter 8. So it talks about a succession of kingdoms, and all of the prophecy about kingdoms in Daniel is during the Babylonian Empire. So I always thought Daniel would be a good book if you had somebody who said, well, where's the validity of the Bible? Daniel would be a good book to say, okay, here it was in the reign of the Babylonian kingdom, and Daniel has these dreams, and he dreams about the Mede-Persian Empire taking over, and then he dreams about the Grecian Empire taking over, and how it starts with initially Alexander the Great, and then it goes to his 4 generals, and then it talks about doesn't talk specifically what empire it is, but then he talks about the Roman Empire. So it's a succession of empires over the next 500 years in prophecy is in Daniel. And you can validate that in history books. because it's in Western Civ. If you've taken Western civilization, it talks about those kingdoms. So there's a lot of validity in the book of Daniel to the Bible if somebody's a doubter, in my mind. I think it's a good book from that particular standpoint because it is so historically accurate and easy to get the history that backs up what's in Daniel. Now, I started with chapter 7 and 8, which is the end of the Babylonian Empire. It's when Belshazzar is there, which is the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. And he's kind of an idiot. And so they lose the kingdom, and the Cyrus the Great takes over Babylon and takes over the kingdom. So like I said, all of the prophecy takes place during the Babylonian Empire. And now I'll flip back to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is the beginning, in the zenith of the Babylonian Empire. And it's underneath the Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar has captured recently, within a few years, the second year of his reign, so it was last year, he would have captured all of the Israelites out of Israel and brought them back from Jerusalem to Babylon to make them slaves, to enslave them for 70 years. So this is kind of the beginning of the 70 years at this end. The reason I did it that way is because I wanted to fill in some of the other kingdoms so that we could put it all together in chapter 2 where he talks about it, and he talks about the 5 kingdoms. And I want to contrast the 5 kingdoms that he talks about in chapter 2, which is the beginning of the Babylonian Empire. So, in the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, "I've had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means." So who had the dream? Nebuchadnezzar. In chapter 7 and 8, the ones who have the dream is Daniel. So there's a little bit of a contrast there. So who did Nebuchadnezzar summon to interpret their dream?
Magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers.
Yeah. His posse, so to speak. Okay? He brought in all of those ones who could supposedly conjure up and find the meaning and all this other stuff. What did he do that showed wisdom? Nebuchadnezzar. He said, "Yeah, tell me my dream. You guys are so smart. You're so divine as far as your ability to see things and interpret things and like that. Tell me what my dream was first." Who gave Nebuchadnezzar the dream? God. I could read lips. That's good. So Nebuchadnezzar gave him the dream. Why do you think he gave him the dream? It's not on the list. Why do you think he gave him the dream? Yeah. It would be to bring Daniel in to Nebuchadnezzar's, so to speak, field of view. At this particular point, he's in the court, but he's in there as one of the slaves that can teach, that's smart and everything like that, but that's about it. He's no threat to the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers at this point. He becomes a threat, but at this particular point, he's not a threat. When Arioch, okay, so I've jumped down to verse 14, and in verse 14, the king says, "Okay, none of you guys can interpret it. Kill them all. Kill them family, take care of them. I don't want them around anymore." You know, he kind of has a fit. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So what was Daniel's concern?
I don't think he wanted to die.
I think he said, "Why are we getting killed? What happened? So how did Daniel approach Arioch? You get in his face? What are you doing? Who are you? What are you doing? No. Wisdom and tact. For whatever reason, the commander listened to him because he went with wisdom and tact. And he said, okay, I've got the king's order. What happens in the Babylonian Empire when they give an order? It's not easily rescinded. You carry out the order. So he was stopping. Think maybe God had a hand in that? So what did Daniel do when he learned of the king's decree? What was the first thing he did? He went to the king. Did he know the dream at that point? Not a clue. Not a clue. But he had confidence. He had absolute confidence. Daniel never was wanting for confidence. Even though he'd just been dragged out of his homeland, everything was taken away, he was a slave in a foreign land, he still had confidence in God. So how do we know Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? That's right. We know them as their Babylonian names. For the bonus points, what is Daniel's Babylonian name? Belteshazzar, as opposed to Belshazzar. Belshazzar was the king, but Belteshazzar was his Babylonian name. But it's interesting, most of us don't remember that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are the Jewish names. It's the Hebrew names they were given when they were taken out of Jerusalem. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the three names that we remember because of the fire. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what was asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king." So what do we know of Daniel and his plea for mercy? We've got one sentence. We don't know what they plead, what really their mercy, what their prayer was, or anything like that. But God listened. How did he respond? Yeah. I don't know whether he revealed it to all four or just to Daniel. Doesn't really say. The implication is it was to Daniel only, because Daniel was the one who went into the king. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him." Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, "I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means." The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, it's one of the few places you see it, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about." So how anxious do you think Nebuchadnezzar is at this particular point with what Daniel said to him? Nebuchadnezzar says, kill them all. They don't know what my dream is. And Daniel, what is the first thing Daniel says? No man can tell you what your dream means. I'm thinking Nebuchadnezzar's starting to get out of his throne. And he's about ready to kill this guy himself. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. It's good that he added that real quick to the end of that statement. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come. And the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation, and that you may understand what went through your mind. So he stayed really focused on the king. So why did God reveal the dream to Daniel? Because he asked. And he had confidence he was going to be shown what the dream meant. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not made by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. So that's the dream. What is a rock, and what does it that destroying the statue signify? Kind of two questions in one. So who's the rock? Jesus. What does destroying the statue signify? The superiority, the power over everything, the superiority of the rock over all these mighty kingdoms. What does the rock becoming a mountain signify? It's the growth of the church.
You know, even in the Old Testament, I know this is Old Testament, but the mountain was where they worship God. Too.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's just, that's part of the mountain that it comes to.
A lot of times mountains signify kingdom, the holy kingdom. So let's move on. This was a dream. I'm not getting as far as I thought. Where am I at? 27? This was the dream. And now we will interpret to the king. Your majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and mighty and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. So what kingdom does the gold head represent? The Babylonian kingdom. Okay, it's plain what it is. And like I said, you have to put it together with the ones that are in 7 and 8 where it explains a little bit more about those. 8 is specific, where it talks about the Mede-Persian Empire, and it talks about the Grecian Empire, to figure out what it means. Because the only one that he explains what it is, specifically in chapter 2, is the Babylonian kingdom. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. So now he's talking about the silver. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. The bronze is the next one. And we know what those two are from the other ones and from history, what those particular kingdoms are. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. And if you look back in chapter 7 talks about the beast that's of iron teeth, that smashes and breaks everything. It's the same description that's here in chapter 2. Just as you saw the feet and toes, partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mingled with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. So, what does Daniel say the next two kingdoms are?
The Bronze Kingdom rules over the whole earth, and that's the Greeks, it's Alexander.
That's Alexander. And the inferior one is the Persian kingdom. What's one of the things that Babylon, the Babylonian kingdom, were known for? One of the wonders of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. When you walked up, it was impressive. Babylon was impressive with the gates that they had, with the fresco tiles that they had in the gates and everything like that. It was a lavish looking kingdom. And that's kind of when they say the next one will be inferior to yours. The Persians weren't that lavish. And then, of course, we had Alexander the Great coming up as far as the Greek. He wasn't lavish at all, okay? But he was a brilliant commander as far as military. So you can kind of see what those, it fits, but he doesn't say too much about those kingdoms. How does the description of the fourth kingdom differ than that of the first three? Is it, huh? It's divided. It's more, there's more specific about it. And he talks about the division, and it's clear in his discussion on it is the iron part and the iron mixed with clay is a kingdom. Now, he saw it here. He saw it again in chapter 7 at the end of the 70 years. And it really bothered him at the end of the 70 years. He said that was scary. He wanted to know what that beast was. He didn't ask too much about it at this particular point. But it's the same kingdom. It's the Roman kingdom. When Rome started out conquering, how did they take the lands that they conquered? Like Sicily and Corsica, which is off the coast of Italy. They were pure Roman. Everybody there was a Roman citizen. They used Roman money. What language did they speak? Latin. They all spoke Latin, okay? When Rome spread out and conquered the rest of the world, what languages did people speak? Whatever their native tongue was. It was mostly Greek, because the Greek Empire didn't do it that way. You were Greek. You used Greek money. You spoke Greek. You did things Greek. Okay, they made it. They imbued, maybe inculcated is a better word. Forcibly drove their culture into whoever they conquered. Rome did not do that. They allowed that culture to remain as it was. They just ruled over it. They made sure you didn't cause trouble, and they collected taxes. That was the iron mixed with clay. So that's what that was talking about. So, at the time of those kings, God, the God of heaven, will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. So now he's talking about the fifth kingdom. Nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end. But it itself will endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut from the mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. So what kingdom will God set up that will never be destroyed? His spiritual kingdom. Different kind of kingdom. Can you figure out from what's here that it's a spiritual kingdom? There's only one clue that I can see.
Not made by human
not made by human hands. But you can read right over that, and you can see where the Jewish mind was in the time of Christ, that he's going to read right over that, and he's going to see this last kingdom, and it's going to endure forever, and it'll crush all the other kingdoms. Okay. Then Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery." So how did he respond? Ruler of the world, most powerful man in the world. He bowed down before him. And he recognized God. So what might be going through Nebuchadnezzar's mind at this point? Who is this God?
He's frightened.
He's frightened, but he says, this guy is in touch with the God of gods, with the King of kings. Where do I need to put him? In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms. But it itself will endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut from the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. So he's the same thing. What's the distinction? Everlasting versus ones that are temporal. I already did that one. And it will come about in the last days that the mountain, now I'm in Micah. So now I'm going to go to Micah and I'm going to Isaiah to finish up. And we're going to talk more about mountains. Okay? And remember, from Daniel, the stone became a mountain. The kingdom grew into a mountain. And that's where Micah's leveraging that, as well as Isaiah. And it will come to about in the last days that the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and the peoples will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord and to the house of the God of Jacob, so that he may teach us about his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For from Zion will go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." So what's he referring to in the last days?
It's the last age. It's after death, after the resurrection of Christ, really, I guess.
Yeah, we are in the last days. It's after the resurrection of Christ, and it's his kingdom's established, and that is the mountain of the Lord. So what's the Lord's kingdom referred to as? The mountain. And he will judge between many peoples and render decisions for mighty distant nations. Then they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift a sword against nation, and never again will they train for war. Instead, each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree, with no one to make them afraid, because the mouth of the Lord of armies has spoken. So how will the people respond to the mountain?
Looks like peace.
Peace. Remember when Christ showed up in the upper room after he resurrected? What's the first thing he said? Peace to you. So, again, kind of put yourself in a perspective of reading this Old Testament scripture as a Jew. What do you think?
From a Jewish point of view, it looks like garbage. But look
Everybody gives up, but everybody comes, in their mind, to Jerusalem. The word is a physical word. Is the word a physical word? What was the word?
Jesus.
It was Jesus, okay. But they're going to interpret it to say, okay, we have all the scriptures. That's the word. We're going to go out and teach Judaism to everybody in the world, and it's going to be peaceful. And that's going to be our kingdom. It fits, doesn't it? It does. I mean, it does fit, but it doesn't fit. It's not what he was. You've got to dismiss that last part where it says, in the last days. So in Isaiah, I've only got, I think, 3 more slides. The word which Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now it will come about that in the last days the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains. And it will be raised above hills, and all the nations will stream to it. And many peoples will come and say, come, let's go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, so that he may teach us about his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For the law will go out from Zion, and the word from the Lord from Jerusalem, a word of the Lord from Jerusalem, and he will judge between the nations, and will mediate for many peoples, and they will beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning knives. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. Does that sound familiar? Very familiar what's in Micah. Almost the same words. So you have the chief of the mountains that he refers to. What are the other mountains? Who's the chief of the mountains? God. God, the godly kingdom. What are the other mountains? Different kingdoms of the world. Daniel, Micah, Isaiah, you have to also look at those books from a lens to say, where's his focus? Where's God's focus as far as bringing the word to man? Because it talks about all the mountains. Well, all the mountains are all the kingdoms. Well, you have kingdoms over in China. You have kingdoms in Northern Asia. You have kingdoms in Northern Europe. You have kingdoms in North America. You have Mayan and Aztec kingdoms in South America. But what he's talking about the whole world here is the whole world as it relates to Israel, as it relates to what's going on in that part of the world that's going to explode to the rest of the planet. So you have to look at it when it starts talking about all the mountains. You can kind of see now God is the chief mountain. And we've had all the kingdoms of the world, but all the kingdoms of the world come to him. It's spread out over the whole earth. Where are we seeing the response of these? Okay, this is talking about it in Micah. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain for the earth. For the earth will be part of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters covers the sea. Then on that day, the nations will resort to the root of Jesse, who will stand as a signal flag for the people. And his resting place will be glorious. Then it will happen on that day that the Lord will again recover with his hand, the second time, the remnant of his people who will remain from Assyria, Egypt, Pathos, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he will lift up a flag for the nations and assemble the banished ones of Israel, and they will gather the dispersed from Judah from the 4 corners of the earth. So, who's from the root of Jesse? I can't hear you. Jesus, yeah. I mean, it's just David, and then David's all the way through, and then you get to Jesus. What day does the Lord recover the remnant? It's in verse 11, the last half. The remnant of his people who will remain from Assyria to Egypt, blah, 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 from the sea. He will lift up a flag for the nations and assemble the banished ones of Israel. What day did that happen? How about Pentecost? When was the church opened up? Pentecost. When the apostles stood there and opened it up. And what did people hear? The good news in their own tongue. People from Pathos, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, Assyria, Egypt, all over. The flag for the nations, it would have been the word, would have been the good news, would have been the gospel. Then the jealousy of Ephraim will depart, and those who harass Judah will be eliminated. Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, and Judah will not harass Ephraim. They will swoop down on the slopes of the Philistines on the west. Together they will plunder the people of the east. They will possess Edom and Moab, and the sons of Ammon will be subject to them. And the Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt, and he will wave his hand over the Euphrates River with his scorching wind. I'll get it for you when you want to get up. And he will strike it. That was 2 rings or 1? 1, okay. Into 7 streams and make the people walk over in dry sandals. And there will be a highway from Assyria to the remnant of the people who will be left, just as there was for Israel on the day that they came up out of Egypt. So, I think that was it, yeah. You can see how this would be interpreted. Everybody's going to come to serve us. And that's why James and John says, can we be at your right hand, your left hand when you rule the kingdom? They were still, you could see, they're thinking earthly kingdom. The next section that Doug and I are going to go into is to look at Christ and how he tried to adjust their view of what the kingdom was. And he did it a lot. He had a lot of parables. He had a lot of discussion about kingdom. So we're going to talk about kingdom from that particular point as far as how he tried to dial them in to say, this is what the kingdom of God is, not what you think it is. And they didn't get it until the day of Pentecost.
Never did get it.
Sing the